With another edition of the Everest Connections. I'm AP Harold, and we're joined by a very special guest. We've talked to jockeys, owners, trainers, bloodstock agents, but we haven't talked to a doctor of veterinary medicine, and we do that today. Dr. David Garth, Sydney Equine Practice. Appreciate your time, man.
G'day, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. I want to start off with the fragility of these animals. All life is fragile, as all doctors know, as all people know. But thoroughbred racehorses are especially fragile. They're majestic, beautiful animals, but they can break down pretty quickly and they can have a host of maladies and other injuries. What should the general public, even the racing fan, know about these tremendous animals?
Horses are basically born athletes. They're made to run. Being a flight animal, that's what they would normally do in nature. And their whole system is built around being able to run reasonable distances at very fast pace. But it also means because they've got that ability, their biology is constantly pushing those limits. So when a horse gallops, those limits are being tested, and they're the injuries that we see. Well, if you look at any athlete around the world, any athlete that's competing at the top level is always prone to various aches and pains. And even at your local footy club level, they get their aches and pains and niggles, and they can't make it any further than that. And horses are no different with all of those sort of problems.
And Doc, is there any difference in the physics? Of course, human beings, Homo sapiens, we have two legs. Horses have four. They can go faster, but I'm guessing that's also twice the opportunity for problems.
Yeah, it does create more problems, but it also means that they're probably more balanced than we are. A horse's leg has most of the muscles up high in the leg. So it means that they can travel over distances using less energy than we would. Thus, they can travel further than we would at a quicker pace.
In your practice, you specialized years ago in the ponies, in horses. What was it that drew you back to your boyhood love of the horse?
I'd always grown up with horses, working in a racing stable when I was a young kid, and working my way through to doing other things. And then coming back to I missed horses. I'd been around them all of my life. And when I decided to go away from them, I realised how much I actually missed them. And that's why I decided to come and do what I'm now doing.
When you treat somebody's pet horse, whether it's a pony or a standard horse, quarter horse, etc., versus a thoroughbred, what are some of the general differences that you have to analyze?
So a lot of the ponies that you're dealing with, their injuries are generally, they're a more common thing, but they're a lesser performance-related issue. Things like foot abscesses and illnesses are a lot more common. And also they're older horses, so they get more problems with their stomachs, the feed they're eating, things like that. One of the big considerations is always cost and the cost of the procedures when you're dealing with pets versus dealing with racehorses. And it's a lot more difficult to send a pet for surgery that's going to be $10,000, $15,000 as opposed to a racehorse that needs that surgery and has that ability to possibly make that money back in the future. So we have to take that.
Excuse me, Doctor. Dr. David Garth is our guest on the Everest Connections. He is with Sydney Equine Practice. And I want to ask you a follow-up on that. With a pony or somebody's pet, you've got emotion, and of course, you've got cost, as you mentioned. With a racehorse, you've got emotion, cost, and then there's that big investment. It is not just a pet, but it's somebody's livelihood. How do you go about balancing? Because people are asking you advice. Maybe it's the first time they're seeing it, or maybe you're the second or third opinion. What is your philosophy, generally speaking, when you're talking to these owners, or maybe it's a syndicate that owns this racehorse?
It's important, firstly, to be, if you're open and honest with everyone, whether it's even the vet that's looked at the horse as the primary call, or whether it's the trainers and the owners. I find open and honesty with everyone is the easiest way forward. And then if you lay the facts out in front of everyone can then make an informed decision about how they move forward with the horse from there.
I don't know a lot about animals. I love them. I've had some dogs over the years, a pet snake and some birds and some fish. I would imagine one of the issues we're dealing with, whether it's a pony or a racehorse, just the sheer size of these animals. What are some of the precautions you guys have to take, whether it's some anesthesia or multiple people soothing, calming the animal, even for a general inspection?
Yeah, sometimes it does take a little bit of sedation to quieten the horse down because of their temperament. and that can mean sometimes your examination can be affected a little bit because of the horse's temperament as well. So there is various horses that that you can't examine their hind legs because that horse is very difficult. And if you need to, then you're going to need a lot of sedation to actually have a proper look at it. So that's an option we've always got up our sleeve.
Doc, how often do you work race day at the track?
So we work every day of the week at the racing track, examining the horses after they've worked in the morning, being the stable vets. We don't work on race day at the races. We may be called on by the trainer to examine the horse after it's raced when it returns back to the stable. So we're always on call for those things. But it's a conflict of interest if we were to then look after the horses in the stable in the morning, then they go to the races and we knew of various niggly issues the horse has that we were then examining on race day. So we avoid doing any of that.
Gotcha, an ethical situation there. Yeah. Can you describe just generally, though, the responsibilities of the doc who is at the races and what he or she may have to do when a horse runs into something?
So most of the race day responsibility is examining horses that have performed poorly. So the vets will trot them up after racing, have a listen to their heart for any arrhythmias. If something goes amiss on race day for that horse, the vet will attend to it, be it on the track, and that's when the screens may be put up and the veterinarian may have to elect to euthanize the horse on welfare grounds. It's a pretty uncommon occurrence in today's racing, and I think trainers and no one in the industry wants to see the horses getting hurt on race day. And I think we're pretty good at making sure that horses that are going to the races are fit and sound. So then the race day veterinarians aren't having to deal with those problems.
This is the Everest Connections. He's Dr. David Garth. I'm AP Harold. In the United States where I live, we've got 50 states, and a lot of these states have horse racing, and different states have more strict or more lenient rules, regulations for the medications and when a horse can race. Is it the same thing in Australia, or is it a nationalized body?
So there is a nationalised body that oversees the different racing jurisdictions. There's quite often some conflict between the different jurisdictions about what's allowed and what's not allowed. One example of that at the moment is a product called Altrinagest, which is it stops mares cycling, and there's been a few problems with different versions of that over in Australia. And one state has allowed it to be used, the other state has banned its use. So having ideally all of the states combined and we're all operating under the same jurisdictions, that makes things far easier if we do. One thing that would be really nice for them to bring in would be a list of approved medications that the racing jurisdictions are happy with us using and have appropriate withdrawal times. Because over here, we have things on a list that are banned or prohibited substances, but there's no list to say these things are approved. And there's also no list that the racing jurisdictions have given us with hold times for these products going to races.
When I look perhaps to buy a pony, I might be spending, whether it's Australian or American dollars, 1,000 or 2,000. If I'm looking for a horse that is going to compete potentially down the road in the Everest, let's add a couple of zeros, 100,000, 200,000. So I'm pretty sure I'd be calling somebody like you for an inspection. How long does that take? What are you looking for? What is that going to run me?
It's going to cost you between $150 and $200. Most of the inspection, the x-rays are submitted to a repository on yearlings, so we can access them anywhere around the world to view them. There's 36 images to view of each yearling that goes through the sales. And then there may be what's called a video scope, where there's they put a camera down the horse's throat to see how its breathing is. So we'll then assess those things. Then it's a matter of having a look at the horse clinically, where we look at its nostril, look in its mouth, have a feel of its legs, watch it walk, looking for any abnormalities that may affect how the horse is going to race in the future. And then from there, we put all that information together and we put the horse into a grading, whether it be a low-risk horse, a moderate-risk horse, or a high-risk horse. And that can then inform the buyers. Now, there's a lot of times people can be buying them for different things, whether it be to race or whether it be to buy, educate, and then try and on-sell. So there's different things that we have to take into account for each buyer. So that's where having a good relationship with the buyer is really important from a veterinarian's perspective.
You mentioned the x-rays, and as I did my research on you, your background, undergraduate degree in radiology, I would imagine that's of particular interest to you, and perhaps you could tell us something more than a typical doctor could with all that experience and background. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's my background in medical imaging in the human world was really important. That's what sort of led. I've always had an interest in sports medicine, had an interest in the medical imaging, and then with horses growing up, and this has allowed me to do what I love, basically. Um, but it's also meant that you've got a unique set of skills that not every veterinarian has. So I combine that. At sales is a perfect example when I get to use those skills.
And let's talk about sales. If I'm looking to buy a horse to potentially compete in the Everest, it's 1,200 meters. It's, at least for the thoroughbred world, a sprint. What are some things that I want to be particularly concerned about medically? And what are some things that maybe a horse that has to go a longer distance, like the Belmont Stakes in the US, 1.5 miles, that I wouldn't be as concerned about?
Now, what it comes down, a lot of things come down to timing too. When you're talking about fast horses running at speed, if we're looking at golden slippers and 2-year-olds, you're looking for horses that are clean, that aren't going to have any issues, that are going to need time. Some of the other issues we find, if a horse is given time, that education to build them up slowly, basically like taking a horse into the gym and building up their muscles and endurance, there's a lot of things that they can live with. Whereas if we're getting a horse going early, they have to be clean. We can't be looking at things that have low-grade arthritis, OCDs and bone cysts, because those horses just don't run early. So it's trying to weigh up what the condition the horse has and how it's going to affect it in the future.
When we think about running, whether it's human beings with their Nikes or Adidas, I think is the correct, we call it Adidas in the US, or Converse or Reebok, we think of shoes. Of course, horses have 4 shoes. How important are those, and how many advancements in your lifetime and over, say, the last 100, 200 years in the industry have horseshoes undergone?
Obviously, shoeing's an integral part. As they say, no hoof, no horse. So the different shoes, generally as a stock standard, most horses will be in steels early. I've been at a trainer this morning that has all of his young horses barefoot, and they do all of their education as a young horse barefoot. The farrier just trims those horses. Then a lot of horses will go into steels and then into aluminium race plates later on. Now, that's pretty stock standard across the board for most stables. The aluminium race plates are obviously very light, but they wear out much quicker than the steel shoes. They're okay for the majority of things. Now, that's something that as a vet, we have to work pretty closely with the farrier, because there's various conditions that come about that if we can modify the way a horse moves or its action, we can then help to alleviate a strain on a ligament or pressure on a particular point by just changing their shoeing. And that's where a good farrier that you have a good relationship with can modify those things, and the two of you to work together to put them in different types of shoe, whether it be a heart bar shoe, which has been around for ages, or an egg bar shoe, or a straight bar, or do a 3/4 shoe, so remove a part of the heel out of a shoe. So there's lots of different things, and that's where if you have a good farrier that you can work with, it makes a huge difference.
If you had a horse in the Everest, how many days or weeks before the race would you want to put the 4 shoes that horse is going to wear during the race on?
Most horses going to the Everest have generally had a couple of starts before they're going to an Everest, and probably a couple of trials. So most of them, by the time they enter into a stable, they're put in aluminium plates. So they'll have already been in them for probably 6 to 8 weeks. A lot of the time, those shoes are getting changed every 3 or 4 weeks, and the farrier will then come through the stable race day morning and check those feet and make sure that everything's hunky-dory. All the nails are in the right place and the horse is ready to go.
Our guest on the Everest Connections, the proprietor of Sydney Equine Practice, Dr. David Garth. Doctor, how much money should a potential owner of a high-end racehorse budget annually to care for the equine?
It does vary a lot, depending on different procedures a horse might have and any complications. But as a general run-of-the-mill, you're probably looking at between $3,000 and $5,000 for the run-of-the-mill yearly outtake if you don't have any additional problems.
So it's a nice chunk of change, but it's not crazy prohibitive.
Yeah, exactly.
let me change gears here, and we're going to drop the doctor and just David Garth, the racing fan. I'm going to take the Everest out for a second. Any race besides the Everest that you could watch or attend, what would it be and why?
The number one race for me, being a racing purist, is the Cox Plate in Melbourne. That's my favourite race. It's the proper weight for age race. Generally, the best horses winning that race. I've loved it ever since I was a kid watching it. The horse I remember winning that race and just being in awe was a horse called Might and Power. He was very special.
Let's take you back to when you were a kid. Was it a particular horse, a race, a family member that got you hooked on horse racing? What was it?
No, it was just down the road from me when I was a kid growing up. I had my own horses and they needed stable staffs. They were friends of the family, so I gave them a hand at that point, and things have just gone from there. That's how I ended up where I am now. So
just like we couldn't have predicted your career with all the different, you worked as a stable hand and in radiology for human beings, and now a veterinarian practicing specifically with horses. We couldn't have predicted this race, the Everest, 10 years ago, even existing. And then it takes the island continent by storm. When you first heard about it, what were your thoughts about this peculiar race with the slot holders?
I had my reservations at the time. It's turned into an amazing concept, but I had my reservations at the time because it's interesting that people can pick a horse to go in a race rather than having to be eligible for that individual race. But I guess the people that own the slots have a love of racing. They are picking the best horses for the race, or the best horses that are in the country at that period of time. And that's what the Everest is showing to be.
How many iterations, how many times did the Everest have to run for you to be won over as a fan versus a skeptic?
Pretty much the first year it was run, I got taken up by the hype of it. I'd previously always thought that the Melbourne Spring Racing Carnival was the pinnacle of racing, but the Everest has come along and it's revolutionised racing in New South Wales, and it's made it competitive with Victoria.
Doctor, just like the Everest has evolved, science is always changing. There's new developments in your industry. From the time you got into the business till today, what's the biggest breakthrough in the care of these high-end animals that you see?
One of our biggest things is the ability to diagnose different conditions. And this has come about from my medical imaging background, but we've now got ability to see things, whether it's x-rays or ultrasound, that we couldn't see 30 years ago. The technology has just improved leaps and bounds, and there's more options out there to get an answer and find the problem and then try and treat it because you know what the condition is. There's conditions that just weren't being diagnosed regularly 10, 20, 30 years ago, and now they're just a common occurrence. Those conditions haven't changed. They've always been there, but we just had put them down to other things. It's now we've got the ability to diagnose them that has made a difference.
When a horse breaks a leg, correct me if I'm wrong, I think pretty much it's Katie bar the door. That's the end for the horse. What type of a breakthrough will we have to see conceivably to change that?
There is a lot of the general public don't realise this. There's a lot of injuries that occur in horses that aren't the end for them. We've got the ability to fix all sorts of things. They see the odd catastrophic one that goes on race day, and they remember that. They don't see all the little things that we're able to put back together. The biggest thing, we've got the ability to fix even most of those catastrophic injuries, because they're no different to some of the human fractures where they'll put a plate in or do those things. What happens is it's the aftercare that we have a lot of troubles with, because horses are quite unique in the way they stand. It's all the complications post that surgery that we know that we cannot get a horse through. And they've tried different methods of managing those horses so they don't get those conditions. And they've been quite unsuccessful at them and up until this point. And the amount of money that's around to be able to fix some of those conditions in some of those horses, it's not through a lack of wanting. And we all want to see those things fixed. It's just that we don't have the ability to manage the horses after through those problems.
Finally, Doctor, horses have captivated the human species for eons. They're such majestic, beautiful animals. They're utilitarian. They help us with plowing and warfare and transportation. Also, of course, we race them. For a young person who's captivated by these animals and wants to follow in your footsteps and get into your career, what should they think about? What should they do to take those first steps?
Having my background in working in racing stables is really important. If you can't handle a horse, you are not. It's going to be very difficult for you to be an equine vet. You have to be able to handle a horse and have a good understanding of the horse, but you also need to understand what the trainers, what the farriers, what everyone's role is in the system to be able to get the horses to the races and have them race successfully. It's really important that people have horse handling skills, I think.
The extremely talented and experienced Dr. David Garth, Sydney Equine Practice. We appreciate your time on the Everest Connection, sir.
Thank you very much.